Hey, this is John. Thanks for joining me for this video today. For many years, my family and I had a Friday night habit of going to a local bookstore, picking up some books, cup of coffee, reading some magazines, maybe eating a cookie or two, maybe. And it was just something we enjoyed doing. I started looking at model magazines. This was late 2005. I wasn't in the hobby at the time. I'd been out since I'd been a teen. But I just started looking at model magazines, and I was stunned at what I remembered of my modeling as a kid and what I was seeing in these magazines. These magazines had stuff like resin and photo etch and these airbrushed finishes, and I mean, just really incredible looking models. And so we'd go in there and I'd get my cup of coffee and cookie or two, and I'd look at these magazines. Well, at some point my wife said, well, you keep looking at these magazines and looking at these magazines and you don't get back into the hobby. Why don't you get back into the hobby? And at the time I said, nah, that's for kids. That's not for me. You know, these guys are professionals. They do this for a living. That's what I thought. You know, that all the guys in the magazines were just professional modelers. That's all they did. And so I just kept looking at the magazines and reading them and thinking, man, that's incredible work. Well, in February of 2006, my wife, she decided I'm gonna push him a little bit. And I don't know if it was a conscious decision, but she got a model kit and some glue and a few paints for me for my birthday. And I built it and I loved it. As soon as I finished it, I went to the store and I got another one. And I built it and I loved it. And I started getting involved in forums and I started asking questions and I started trying to get better equipment. Somebody sent me a compressor for an airbrush and somebody else actually sent me an airbrush, and just some really nice people. And I got really excited about the hobby really quick. Well, the third model I built was an Accurate Miniatures P51 Mustang in 1/48 scale. Now, I don't keep many of the models I build now. I try to sell most of them on eBay, because if I didn't, I would have shelves full of models that I have no shelf space for. But this one I kept. I don't know why I kept it. I just kept it. But this is that model. And it's just a fairly simple model. Olive drab on the top, neutral gray on the bottom. Not much in terms of weathering or detailing or anything like that. I just built it out of the box. I was pretty happy with it. And I took it up to my local hobby shop and I put pictures online, and everybody was like, hey, that looks great, man. You did an awesome job on that. And I was pretty proud of myself and pretty happy with it. And you know, the back pats were just coming in. And then I started looking at that model and the stuff I saw in the magazines, and I realized there was a pretty big gap in how they looked. Now, before I fully tackle what I'm going to talk about in this video, let me say a couple of things right up front. This hobby is about having fun, period. If how you hobby is how you have fun, then stick to having fun. I'm not saying don't have fun. So please don't misunderstand the things I'm going to be talking about. And I know it sounds a little pretentious to maybe even say that, but I want to be real clear. I don't want anybody to be confused, that because the message that I try to convey is anybody can do this, and it's all about having fun. And if you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. So there's 3 messages. But I want to be real clear that I'm not going off of that. All of that stuff still counts. However, the premise I want to try and work on in this video, the deep thoughts that I've been having about this, are based on the notion of our back pats hurting your growth and my growth in the hobby. And I've been thinking about this for quite a while, actually, and it was a conversation yesterday with a new friend of mine, Wilson, and Wilson, I hope I'm saying your name right, Alinea. But we were talking online. He had sent me some questions and we got to talking and really talking about this subject of, do the accolades potentially hurt your growth? And the more I thought about it as we discussed it, the more ideas came to mind to talk about. And I started fleshing out my notes. And now I'm sitting here doing this video. Anyway, so it's something I've been mulling over in my mind for a while, trying to get hopefully the right words to say to be constructive in examining this subject. A few months back, I did a video where I talked about addressing, fear of failure, fear of messing up. And I kind of touched on this subject a little bit in that. But even at that time, I thought, this is something that needs to be addressed a little more, because we see this all the time. When you go on forums and social media groups and things like that, people put up photos, and most folks come along, and there's nothing wrong with this. It's good intentions. And they say, hey, looks great. That's great. Cool. Love it. Whatever. And those are fine. Don't stop doing that. But you have to stop and think. Not everybody can be right, because everybody's coming at this with a different eye towards how they evaluate models. When I was brand new at modeling back in 2006, and I looked at my P51, I thought, man, this thing's pretty good. And then I started looking at it and comparing it, and I thought, well, it's not bad, but there's some things I can improve. But everybody's telling me it's good. Were they lying? No, they weren't lying. They were trying to be encouraging. They were trying to be helpful. Some of them who may have modeled the same way looked at that and thought, wow, that looks really good, because they were viewing it as they viewed their own models. So that, I guess you'd say, perception bias really comes into play, and we have to think about that if one of our goals in enjoying the hobby is continual improvement. And I think one of the things that's important in addressing this concept, are those accolades potentially hurting my growth in the hobby? We have to separate our self-esteem, what we perceive as our self-worth, from the work we do. If you tie the two too closely together, I think it's a negative thing. Because in that case, and maybe this is a bit extreme, but in that case, maybe you do a model, and in terms of its construction, its painting, all of those objective things that we can look at, the parts may be crooked, and there may be seam lines, and there may be thumbprints, and there may be, spots in the paint. There's things that could be improved to make the model look better. And if everybody's telling us, that looks great, that's awesome, way to go, dude. And one person comes along and says, hey, that looks pretty cool, it looks like you had fun with that. One thing you might want to try and do is fill those seams in. That's going to give you even a better look. And if you step back from that and go, I have no value as a human being. And I know that's ridiculous to say it that way, but I've seen that kind of response. And it's dangerous not only for your own well-being, but on the less important subject of growth in the hobby. So I think one thing to understand is that growth in the hobby requires some separation of who you are as a person and who you are as a modeler. They're not the same thing. And if you try to find your full identity in that, it's going to let you down every time. Thus, the key is, as you're working on your models and you're posting them to social media, you're showing them to people, you have to look at it objectively. You have to step back and you have to say, okay, I know some people are going to like this. Some people may not like this. I can't see this as the best thing in the world ever. It may be the best thing I've ever done. When I built this P51, at the time, this was the best thing I'd ever done because I'd done 2 models before this. This looked better than those other 2 models. But now I actually rebuilt the same kit about 5-6 years later, and it looked significantly better than this original one I did because I had learned. So we have to always understand that our modeling is on a continuum. We're moving along, and thus we have to look at it objectively and evaluate what we hear objectively. Now, when somebody says, hey, that looks great, take it at face value. They looked at it, they think it looks great. That's wonderful. Don't discount that, but don't make that your main diet. I think that's one of the critical things that has helped me when I started noticing that P51 and kind of the divergence between what I saw that I did and what the work looked like of some modelers that I respected. You know, I appreciated the pats on the back, but I had to start saying I need to look at my work objectively in order to grow. So hopefully I've made a case for the fact that getting a lot of back pats, while they're nice, may not be helpful to your growth in the hobby. Having established that, what are some things that we can do as modelers that help us grow and do it objectively and get better at the craft of modeling? Because if we're better at the craft of modeling, we're going to have more fun. I was reading a very kind comment on one of my other YouTube videos this morning, and somebody pointed out, and this is a bit of a paraphrase because I don't have real good memory. What was I talking about? Oh yeah, he wrote something to the effect of, when we have fun in the hobby, we do the hobby more often. When we do the hobby more often, we get more experience in the hobby. When we get more experience in the hobby, we have more fun. And the cycle just repeats. So it's very important to understand that's what we're going for. If we're having fun, we're going to do it more, we're going to get better. And when you get better, you're going to have even more fun because you're going to be able to execute on plastic what you see in your head. All right, so one of the first things that I recommend people do, it's what I've done for the last, how many years is it? 14 years? And it's helped me, is I pick a few modelers that I really respect. Maybe they're published and known, maybe they're not. But I pick a few modelers that I really respect, and I look at their work, and I pick something out in that work, and I try to emulate that. Let's just be blunt about it. I copy it. And if you say, oh, you shouldn't copy other people's work, then you can't model because you're not going to do anything original. There's very few modelers that actually do something truly original. So everything we're doing is standing on the shoulders of others. Everything I do is standing on the shoulders of others and copying it. Yes, we may extend it, we may combine things, we may come up with some different combinations than other people have that we know, but then we get on social media and find, 20 people that go, oh yeah, I've done that, that's a cool method. But picking somebody who's accomplished in whatever genre you're working in, or maybe not even the same genre, but they just have a certain style and a technique and things like that that are worth emulating. And then as you do your work, go ahead and put the pictures out on social media. Let people know that you've done this and here's what you think of it, because you may get some really constructive feedback from it. Now, you're probably going to get a lot of, hey, that looks good. That's cool. Way to go. And again, that's fine. But put it out there. You may get some real constructive comment, but look at it compared to someone that maybe you don't even know them, but in a way they are mentoring you at a distance. I'll give you an example of this. For many years, I build sci-fi now almost exclusively, but for many years I built nothing but World War II fighter aircraft. And there's a fella named, and I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, Daniel Zamarbadeh. He has written books for AK Interactive. His aircraft FAQ is a monumental work. If you're an aircraft builder, even if you're not, and you don't have that book, get that book. It's an expensive book. It's worth every dime. Now, that book is done in what many people call the Spanish school, the Spanish style. And it's just a particular style. For the sake of this video, just know that it's a style. And I started going through that book, and I started trying to emulate Daniel. He was, through that book, mentoring me. Does he know me? No, he doesn't know me from Adam. I'm sure if we sat down and had a cup of coffee, we'd have a great conversation. But he doesn't personally know me. Yet his book was mentoring me. His work mentored me. And a few friends of mine looked at that and said, yeah, but I don't like the Spanish style. And I'm like, you're missing the point. The point is to improve in the hobby. And I have to step back and go, while I may not like everything about that style, the skills required to do it are worth chasing. So when you pick someone who stretches you, who challenges you, and it can be more than one person. Over the years, Daniel has been somebody I've looked up to. Brett Green has been someone I've looked up to. Mike Grant and Steve Budd and all of these other people that do these fantastic models have been people that I look up to and I learn from. So pick someone that you really admire and that you like their work, and let that be kind of your litmus test for growth in the hobby. Now, to follow on with what I just said, don't try and do it all at once. You know, when I got Daniel's book, I didn't sit down and look at, say his section on cockpits and then try and emulate every single technique that he was showing in that. I think a great way to do this, when you've found someone to mentor you, digitally, I guess you would say, distance mentoring, or you found a style that you want to emulate, you have maybe several artists who you like their work. Pick one or two things that maybe you've done before but you feel like you haven't done real well on, or maybe pick one or two things that you've never tried before. Read up on how they do it, see how they do it, ask questions about how it's done, and be careful whose answers you listen to, and then do that on your model, that one thing. Now, it may be, okay, you combine, like if I'm doing an airplane, I'll use this because I'm thinking of Daniel's influence on my work. I might pick one or two things in the cockpit to do. And then I might pick one or two things in how I did the weathering on the exterior. And then maybe I picked one or two things on the landing gear. So it doesn't have to be just one isolated thing across the whole model. There's many aspects to a model and there's many phases in your building. But I guess you'd say pick one per phase. If you're emulating someone from the Gunpla world, you know, and you see a style that they do a frame, the inner frame in, we'll try and execute something from that. If you see a style that they do the exterior armor in, we'll maybe try and do one thing from that. Pick something from the weapons. Take it on in small chunks. You know the old saying about, you know, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Don't go into it with your expectations too high, because you may not be able to achieve it, and that's going to bring you down a little bit. Take on small chunks, work on them. If you mess it up, you know, in your eyes, if you go, here's the work that I'm trying to emulate and here's my work. I do this every day. Here's what I'm trying to accomplish. Here's my work. There have been times I've gone back and painted over it, sanded it down, whatever, and started over and said, okay, I learned a lot from that first attempt. I think I can do it better now. And so I pick small chunks and I go after those. Okay, another thing that you can do when you're focusing on growth in the hobby and viewing your work objectively is, if you do ask, you see this all the time, C&C welcome. Comment and critique is usually what that means. Some people take it as comment and criticism, which I'll talk about in a minute. But if you put your work out there and you ask for that, and someone gives you honest, objective feedback, yes, there's going to be some people that come on and there's a few out there, and I've seen them, and you're going to say, what do you think? C&C welcome. And they're going to say something like, too bad you ignored all your panel lines, or too bad you ignored all your seam lines. That's a real answer I've seen. There's stuff, it may be true, but it's not necessarily helpful. But if you're going to put your work out there and you're going to ask that question, when you get honest feedback, stop and think about it. Look at it. Look at who's giving that feedback. Does it apply? Because I've seen some cases where somebody would say, hey, comment, C&C welcome. And they would get a lot of looks good, looks great. Hey, that's awesome. Cool, I wish mine looked like that. And then they get one that's maybe a paragraph or two that when you read it, it's real objective stuff. It's real helpful stuff. And sometimes the original poster comes along and they say, hey man, that really helped me out, thanks a lot. Sometimes they come along and they push back and they go, no, maybe not this bluntly, but they basically say, no, I got this down, you don't know what you're talking about. And in a few of those cases, the people who are giving the answer back, are giving this objective this objective critique, are people who are at the tops of that genre. So, and you almost want to scream at the person. I don't. But you almost want to scream at him and go, do you know who this guy is? Not that he's better, and this is where I talked about, you have to divorce who you are as a person from who you are as a modeler. Because that other person, in terms of your humanity, one is not better than the other. But in terms of their modeling, this other person may be really good and really experienced and noted within the industry and within the hobby. And so you don't want to dismiss that because you're letting your pride get in the way. So when you do get back pats, view them objectively. If you're going to put it out there, if your only expectation is to receive positive feedback, then I would say don't ask for the C&C. Because if you're not willing to hear it, don't ask for it. Now, if you are really looking for that, then read it, digest it, look at who gave it to you, look at what they say, compare it to your model in an objective fashion, and then you can decide, does this help? Is this a factor? Do they know what they're talking about? Because there are some times that somebody will offer some comment and critique that maybe isn't all that helpful. So you have to filter through those. But when you ask for it, be willing to accept it. Be willing to accept it with some humility. Don't say, do you know who I am? And use it to help you get better. Even those people who leave snarky comments can help you get better. Because sometimes at the core of that snark, there's a kernel of truth. And you have to be willing to take your pride out of it, take a look at what they say and go, you know what? they actually make some sense at the core of what they're saying, even if they're being a jerk in the way they say it. Now, to kind of address, I guess what you'd say, the other side, you're not the person asking, hey, what do you think of this? You're not the person putting your work out there. You're the person looking at the work. If what you want to say is good job, then say it. I'm not saying that every time you put up a comment that it has to be some deep comment, or there has to be, you have to look at it so closely that you find something that you can say, well, you might have wanted to go 4% lighter on that shade of olive drab there along that one panel. I'm not saying that. But look at the work. Evaluate your own experience and where you are in the hobby with objectivity and humility, and offer comment if you feel inclined to do so based on that. Yeah, that looks really great. One thing I've found is filling the seams helps. Or maybe even, yeah, that looks great, but then message them. Because I think one of the things that causes people to reject honest critique is they feel embarrassed publicly. If their pride is way too invested into the hobby, then quite often that, as benign as the statement may be, may create problems. So if possible, contact them. Say, hey, I saw your work. I like what you're doing. I've seen that you've, been doing models and you've been improving, and I love watching your growth. But I have noticed this, and here's how I dealt with that. And really maybe become a little bit of a mentor in that, in helping someone along in the hobby. Because you have to always keep in mind where they're at is where you once were. We all start, I say this a lot, we all start with model number 1. And I think all of us would agree that model number 1 doesn't look like model number 10 or number 20 or number 40. So when you're offering comment, where appropriate, offer objective comment that takes into account where their skills may be, where they may be in terms of how this is tied to their ego. In other words, be kind. Well, I guess to try and start drawing this all to a close, I need to personalize it. I need to bring it back to me, because what I say for me may not work for you, or maybe only part of it does. So I can know I can state this for me, and I know it's true. But in my own brain of thinking, it's small, but it kind of works. Anyway, in my own mind, I've found it most helpful to be paranoid. To be paranoid, and I'm not talking, there's aliens watching me kind of paranoid, but to be paranoid about my work, to look at it and to never be fully satisfied with it. Now, please don't write me and say, you do pretty good work, you should be happy with it. I am happy with my work. I have fun with what I do. But I never look at what I do and say, that is as good as it's going to get. I'm always paranoid of not getting too comfortable with where I'm at so that I stop progressing. But rather that I'm always looking at, how can I improve? How can I improve? How can I improve? Because one of the things I've seen as I've worked in both observing people's work and looking at my own work and going to contests and even judging in contests, what I've seen is if you could put it on a continuum, and sometimes when you're making up percentages in your head, it gets a little wonky. So this is not absolute math. But it's like there's a giant chunk of modelers that fit within, okay, this is where 95% of modelers fall in terms of their work. Those guys that we look up to, those ladies that we look up to, those modelers who are at the pinnacle, it's not that they're 40 or 50 or 60% better than the majority of modelers around them. It's that last few percent that makes the most difference. I think it was a miniature artist named Sam Lenz. I think that's who it was, and I may be wrong, and if I'm misquoting who it is, I apologize. But he was talking about, you know, people ask him for advice, and he said almost right off the bat, he said, I think he even said, you know, you don't even have to necessarily look at the model. You can always say, add more highlights, add more highlights. Because, you know, wherever you're at, there's always something that could be done just a little more refined. That's one of the things I mentioned Daniel Zamarbade earlier. That's one of the things that I looked at in his models, is when I tried to replicate it, I would think, okay, I got that. And then I would look at his picture and I'd look at mine and I go, well, it's not quite, I'm missing something. And I'd look even closer and I would go, oh, wow. Where I highlighted it once, if you look close, he did it 3 times. There was one color and then a lighter color and then even lighter color. And I go, okay, let me try that. That little bit of refinement is always going to look better. So I try to operate from a standpoint of being paranoid, of not getting stuck where I'm at. And another thing I try to do is I try not to believe what people tell me. Not that I don't appreciate it, not that I don't like it. I mean, we all have our ego. You can't totally divorce it from the hobby. So I do, please, you know, feed my ego. It helps me. But generally, when everybody's saying, that looks great, that looks great, that looks great, if I get a message from a close friend or a modeler who I really respect, and they say, hey, that looks pretty good, but that's what I really want to know. You'll rarely see me ask for comment and critique. Rarely. Because I know that I'm going to get so many varied things in, and without knowing who's giving it to me, I have a lot to sift through. There's maybe about 2 or 3 people that I'll send a photo to and I'll say, what do you think? And I know that they're gonna just go, hey, that looks pretty good, but you totally missed that seam line there. Oh man, you're right. Or, I've seen you do better. You know you can do better on that. That's the kind of thing that I look for. So operating from a position of paranoia, controlled paranoia, I guess you'd say, has really been helpful to me. And then doing those other things that I talked about, picking someone that you're trying to emulate, that you're following, that you're using as your distant mentor, and then picking techniques that either you've not done as well as you would like, or that you have never done before. Pick those. Those things are really going to help you grow. So we all like getting back pats. Hey, that looks great. Way to go. Best thing ever. We like getting those. And I'm not saying don't appreciate them, don't be thankful for them, because 99 and 44, 100% of the time, they're going to be offered honestly. And appreciate them and take them at face value. But be careful not to fall into the trap of saying, I got 100 likes on that photo and I got 77 comments and 76 of them were looks great, looks great. Because if that one comment was really the useful one, the one that's going to help you grow as a modeler, that's what you need to be focused on. Not all of the back pats, as nice as they are. Because if you're wanting to grow, and I know some modelers, I have friends that they've told me, look, I'm not interested in that. I want to go home at the end of the day and take out a model kit and just put some paint on it and stick it together. And they're modeling the same way they may have modeled when they were 13, 14 years old. And they're perfectly happy with that. So if you're perfectly happy with what you're doing, don't feel threatened by this. Do what is giving you joy in this hobby. But I think for most people, they're going to get the most out of it by growing in the hobby. So don't let the accolades and the back pats slow down or hinder your growth as a scale modeler. Well, thank you so much for watching this video, and especially if you're still watching at this point, I am so grateful for when I look at the percentages. I know I make long videos. I know it's a choice. And I know when I look at the percentages that there may be, it goes kind of high, and then after about 7 minutes, it just drops. And then it stays fairly steady through to the end. So for you 25, 30% that are still hanging in here, thank you so much. I truly appreciate it. And I'm grateful that you've watched my work, and I hope that you get something beneficial from it. That if nothing else, it helped put you off to sleep in a nice, calm manner. Now, there is a subscribe button down here. No, wait, it's over here. I always have to remember, because when I'm looking at the screen, it's where the monkey logo is. It's over here. So, yeah, towards the end, I get a little loose too. There's a subscribe button down there. And there's also a little bell icon. And what that does is, when you hit that, it updates you when I put out a new video. So I would really be grateful if you would click that subscribe button, click that bell icon. It does help me out in trying to grow this channel. It does help me get more noticed by YouTube so that I can break through to their algorithm and maybe get the videos out there a little more. There's also a like. I would appreciate it if you'd like the video. I know not everybody will, but it helps me when you do. And also if you would share the video just on whatever social media you're on. If you found something beneficial or helpful in this video, if you could just take a moment to just there's a share icon, hit the share icon, share it on your social media. Even if your comment is, hey, this guy's an idiot, go watch him. All publicity is good publicity. I can't speak this morning, right? So anyway, subscribe, like, bell icon, thank you. And of course, there's links down below to the social media that I'm on. I have a blog, check that out. I've got hundreds of articles out there. Before I did video, I did blogging, text and photos. There's a lot out there, so go check that out. And then of course, I have a link to Patreon down there also. Check out that link. There's some various levels offered with some rewards and benefits that come with them. Take a look at that. If you are able and you see something you like there and want to support me, I would be most grateful for your support in what I do. And of course, if you're already a Patreon supporter, thank you so much for that. It means so much to my family and I. And I know I say this at the end of every video and people probably get tired of hearing it. This is probably where they just go ahead and turn it off. But I really do mean it, because as I've said before, I could not do what I do at the pace I do it, with the materials and tools that I do it, with the kits that I have, in the way that I do it, hosting the website and doing all of these other things. I could not do it if it were not for the Patreon supporters. Yeah, I'd still model, but I'd have to scale way, way, way back. And so you really do make this possible, and I am so grateful for you. My wife is grateful. My kids are grateful. Every time I get a new supporter, I tell my wife, and I tell her, hey, it's this. I tell them by name, because we're really thankful for that. It is such a blessing to know that people like the work that I do and want to come along and say, yeah, I'll help support that. I want you to continue doing what you're doing. So thank you so much for being a Patreon supporter. So with all of that being said, I'll leave you with the final thought that I always like to close with. In this hobby, if you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Happy day to you, friends. Bye-bye.